Most of you know that every so and so often we have conversations about topics that are timely, that are of concern to the Global Futures laboratory community. And clearly Earth Day is a topic that is of concern to all of us. And so we felt this is a good moment and a good topic for one of these conversations. So Earth Day is a perfect moment to reflect on what has happened since its inception, more than half a century ago, 55 years ago, but also to contemplate what role we all can play in building a healthier, thriving future in which all life can thrive on our planet. Our panelists here bring together voices from policy, law, journalism, and the coming generation of change makers to discuss what Earth Day means today, what it has made possible, and where we must go next. Our conversation will challenge us to think critically about the road ahead. For example, what must we do differently? How can we build stronger coalitions? How can we ensure that Earth Day continues to inspire lasting change for the planet and all life it supports? So I would like to briefly introduce our panelists. Michael Dorsey, cannot be mistaken in that group, Chair of the Walton Sustainability Solutions Service and Professor of Practice at ASU. Michael is a globally recognized expert in sustainability, finance, and environmental policy. He's a co-founder of multiple organizations, including the Sunrise Movement, and he advises on ESG investments and has served in the US and UN climate leadership roles. He's a member of the Club of Rome, and we have heard about the Club of Rome. Karen Bradshaw is a law professor and public intellectual whose work reshapes how people relate to nature. She's the author of Wildlife as Property Owners and the forthcoming Depolarized: How Nature Can Save America. Karen collaborates across disciplines and institutions to co-create new and more inclusive environmental futures. Keeping going from right to left, we have Katie Spreitzer. Katie is currently pursuing a master's degree in sustainability solutions and public policy at ASU. As an honors graduate of the School of Sustainability, she brings a passion for climate policy and environmental education. Katie worked at the Arizona State Senate and the Department of Energy and continues to do her part by helping recruit future change makers through her role at the College of Global Futures. And next to me, Lisa Palmer. Lisa is a journalist, author, and editorial director at the Society of Environmental Journalists. We already mentioned that the annual meeting of SEJ will start tomorrow night and will go through the weekend, and Lisa is one of the major drivers of making that thing move smoothly. Lisa is a research professor at George Washington University. She reports on climate, environment, and sustainability. Her reporting has appeared in many outlets such as the New York Times, Nature, Scientific American, The Guardian, Yale's E360, and many others. She's the author of Hot, Hungry Planet and a Fulbright Fellow with global experience in research, storytelling, and science communication. So we will have short opening statements from each panelist, just a short statement on what Earth Day means for you. And then we go into a moderated conversation. So let's start with Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter, and hopefully you can hear me okay. I am really excited to be here. Earth Day is, for me, a symbol. It's a moment in time when we can remember what this means. As a journalist, we rarely specifically cover it as a thing. There's maybe one person that does it, but it is a reminder, and it happens to be just around the time we have our annual meeting here. Mm-hmm. So it's a nice symbol that's a reminder.
Thank you. Katie.
Awesome. Well, I think for me, Earth Day, well, first of all, happy Earth Day to present. Yeah, today's an amazing day. And I think Earth Day for me is a moment where we can really step back and realize why we're doing the work that we're doing. And I think a lot of us in this room are constantly guided by this desire to make the world a better place. And I think Earth Day really, for me, is a moment where I can step back and understand why I'm doing the work I'm doing, and also inspires me to keep going when I hear about all the wonderful accomplishments we've made across the last few years or even the last year. And so I'm really excited to be here to share some of my opinions on Earth Day and the importance that this day brings for us.
Thanks, Karen.
Great. I love Earth Day, and happy Earth Day to everyone. Well said. I love it because it's like when you're having a dance party every night in your kitchen on your own, and then suddenly everyone else is there with you, and you're all celebrating together. Because I, like so many people in this room, have Earth Day every day, right? These are conversations and thoughts that are part of my daily life, whether it's hiking outside or teaching environmental law or thinking about a future writing project. But the thing I love about Earth Day is it invites people who are part of my everyday life, but not part of my academic or scholastic communities, to the party. And so I always celebrate Earth Day in two ways. This year is a little bit of an exception, but I did the first one, which is I go to my children's school. I have a 2-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I love that they have not only celebrated Earth Day or Earth Week, they're actually in Earth Month right now at their school, because there is a young generation that's thirsty for information about protecting the planet. And the second thing I do, which is a lot of fun, is I give the Arizona Sustainability Leadership Awards every year. We have a group of 26 reimaginers, which are people on the ground floor doing work in a variety of fields and places to promote sustainable solutions. I'm not doing it on Earth Day this year because our award winner was Player 15 Group, the Phoenix Suns, and we gave it to them at Sustainability Night in front of 17,000 people, center court at the stadium. So it was a really fun Earth Day, and this is a fun Earth year for me. Is every year an Earth year? Let's make it an Earth year.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, we just can keep going then, right? We don't have to have any,
Exactly.
any recess.
It's like my birthday. It used to be a birthday. Now we have a birth week. Let's just make it a birth month.
Wonderful. Michael.
Yeah, for me, I would say Earth Day is 3 big things. It's a galvanizing moment, and I mean that in the sort of metaphorical and strict sense of that term. We take steel and we put a zinc cover over it to galvanize it. So Earth Day created that infrastructure, that galvanizing infrastructure that Peter talked about, of legislative apparatuses to catalyze the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the Environmental Protection Agency. So it was a galvanizing moment. It was also a catalytic moment. We take for granted now Earth Day, Earth Week, Earth Month, but it really started just in this country. And now that 50x growth of 1 billion people looking at it is one that covers the whole world. Almost every UN member state's involved. So it was a catalyzing force. And also it was an accelerator. And that still continues to this day. It accelerated corporate responsibility. It accelerated the interest in protecting the environment. So it's those 3 things: galvanizing, catalyzing, and accelerating. That's what it was for me.
Yeah, great, powerful statements. So let's start the conversation. Let's start with you, Lisa. So we talked about the tremendous number of people who, in one way or the other, participate these days in Earth Day. So 1 out of roughly 8 people is really engaging somehow. And that is a tremendous multiplication of the initial group that started it. It's also interesting to see that it came out of the anti-war movement, that it came through the academic sort of route. And so looking at that trajectory, what do you think is the reason for that increase? And more specifically, which role does environmental reporting play in this increase of the number of people?
Well, that's a great question. I love that, and I appreciate it very much. I think we're also kind of even represented by this group here, more sort of academic pursuits, more traditions, more people from other sort of career paths are connecting the dots on the environmental issues more than ever. Environmental issues are health issues, they're planetary issues, they're legal issues, they're social issues, they're sustainability issues. As journalists, we work to connect the dots. So we need to be able to speak to experts in law and experts in sustainability and researchers, people who are sort of at the forefront to be able to do that. And that's kind of the responsibility that we have. And by doing so, we can share like the full picture. And so for environmental reporting, we need to be on the ground, seeing how the research is being done or how a specific kind of innovation, a response, or solution is going to be meaningful for the public at large, as well as to tell them about the risks. And I think through those stories that we are hearing from our communities, we're all kind of recognizing that it's sort of a part of everybody's job.
Karen, let's look at the environmental laws. So many of these laws and regulations were enacted around 1970. I sort of looked at the sequence, and for example, some of these laws were signed by President Nixon at the time in December, so that there was, with a delay of about half a year, 3/4 of a year, there was quite a bit of stuff going on, and then 2 years later, 3 years later, it was followed. So which of these would you credit as a direct outcome of Earth Day? Or was Earth Day, together with these laws, the result of a deeper cause?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting. I was talking to a journalist actually yesterday who asked something about how do you square what happens with legal change and legal movements with public reaction and social movements. And the answer is they're really interconnected. And it's so difficult to say one is the cause or the catalyst of another because they're interconnected in these very complicated ways. It's sort of like the sort of new recognition that there's no single inventor of an idea, that many things happen in many ways from many people thinking simultaneously and co-creating around the world. So very often any famous invention or idea happens in many places simultaneously. And I think with respect with both legal and social movements, it is also the case that there are many factors simultaneously occurring that collectively cause the thing to happen, right? The marker to occur. But to pinpoint a specific place where that occurs is difficult to say. I will say Rachel Carson's work is incredibly meaningful, and that built upon other things that were happening in the United States at the time, like the civil rights movement. And so there were all of these forces that collectively created this incredible moment of bipartisan, truly bipartisan action to enact what is today the field of environmental law. And environmental law is really just a bunch of statutes from the 1970s, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, National Environmental Protection Act, all of these different statutes, and they really haven't changed or updated much since. There have been a couple of amendments, but that is the body of environmental law that I teach. Unfortunately, it didn't speak to climate change. It didn't incorporate traditional ecological knowledge. It didn't do many of the things that we would now want to do today. And so I think Earth Day should not only be a reflection on what has happened and how we got here, but now also what can this generation do to create new and more responsive policies today.
So why was that legal framework so static?
That's a great question. I think that there was a moment of public attention that happened in part because of silencing this very sort of innovative, once-in-a-lifetime book that went out to so many homes, because at the time we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have our cell phones, we didn't even have sort of the broad array of media influences, but it became a book of the month. And was sent to millions of American households. So it's like everyone saw the same viral video. It was just a book form. And it created a catalyst, a shared social understanding that was reinforced by things like rivers lighting on fire because they were so polluted. And so you had a moment of bipartisan, truly Republicans and Democrats work together to enact policies that move the ball forward in some ways so far for the time that it wasn't really necessary to do anything else, many thought, at that time, because so much had been achieved. But then what happened in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, and where we are today, is that as the problems evolved and in some ways worsened, the catalyst, the moment of depolarization that occurred had fallen away such that it was deeply polarized and no longer seen as such bipartisan issues.
We'll come back to that because it is a very fundamental question, I think, for where we are and where we will go. Michael, in your field, beyond your field, actually, what milestones have stood out as critical turning points since Earth Day was founded?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest one now is that really the solutions, the things that we need, like clean energy, particularly solar and wind, like alternatives to biodiversity destruction and so forth and so on, but especially in the energy space, that stuff is now profitable. It wasn't at the time of Earth Day. It didn't pencil at all. It didn't make sense to offer those solutions. They were too costly. And we've seen, particularly over the past sort of decade to 20 years, that stuff come in to the fore, and particularly just focusing on energy. Right now, the entire global solar output just last year was displaced more than the emissions of all of the U.S. So, and at an affordable pace. And so we've seen those sort of explosions of the solutions, one take over and really continue at a clip. Last year was the first year in humanity where we saw more than $2 trillion invested in renewables, mostly solar and wind. And that's only going to continue. Right now, we're on a clip of solar deployment doubling almost every 3 years. It took us about 8 years to go from 100 terawatt hours installed to 1,000, and under 3 to get to the next 2,000. So that sort of explosive growth of the solution set is really, I think, monumental, and it's going to continue. We don't have enough. We got to do more, but that's really the milestone.
I can't help but asking the question, given all of that, why are we still growing the consumption of fossil fuels and the related emissions?
Well, they're growing, but at a sort of a reduced rate. Yeah, they are.
Tiny.
I mean, so we had just last year, and we can have an interesting debate on this. Yeah. We had 30 companies dial out of coal. We had India and China, the two coal big players, reduce their deployment by 60%. Not enough, but slowing down. So that is the pacing. And it's interesting now, I think, particularly in this political economic moment, no matter your position, politically, you've got two discourses happening. One on the TV and in social media of, certain people maybe on the right arguing against this stuff. But those same people actually are investing in it, right? So we can have a longer discussion about why that is. But that's happening because of that price signal, because that change is there.
So yeah, we can have, as you said, we can have interesting conversations about that. Especially, will we, with the pace at which we are, will we actually reach any reasonable target? But let's move to Katie. From the perspective of a young person, how does it feel to live in a world where there are these debates that are sometimes really almost, a bit bizarre, where, as Michael said, on the one hand, people say this should not be done or it should be rolled back, but on the other hand, they invest into it. How do you feel this world, if you're looking ahead into, you have probably 70, 80 years to go, there is quite a bit that is ahead of you. How does it feel, especially reflecting upon it on a day like Earth Day, where we are talking about what has happened over the past 50 plus years, and where we are looking at where are we right now? So what's your sense in terms of what's ahead?
Yeah. Well, first things first. I think that question is automatically geared for me to have almost like a pessimistic view about my future and what it's going to look like in 50 years. And I almost think that the reason why we should look for younger voices is because I actually feel hopeful. I feel hopeful about what's going on. I know there's a lot of things in the news that maybe aren't so encouraging, and I talked to some of my friends that aren't in the sustainability field, and they really don't know what's going on with climate change or sustainability. Maybe they don't care. But I feel like what really does give me hope is that I hear about these solutions that are going on, that Michael, you talked about, and I hear about, coal being slowly, I guess, eliminated from being used in our fossil fuels. And so when I hear about some of these smaller accomplishments, I think to myself, okay, well, I've been alive for how long? Maybe 22 years, and now we're already making this jump from using an excessive amount of coal until now. And so I feel like what really motivates me is hearing some of those smaller successes that we've had and really taking them and running with it. Because if I keep thinking about how maybe bleak my future looks, then that's not motivating for me, and that's not motivating for anyone else. And so I think we're really able to hone in on some of those smaller successes and kind of uplift those voices that are able to encourage us to be more hopeful. That really helps me when I think about what's going on and what's going to be my future and what is my future going to look like.
And that's actually a great position to take, because as I said before, we have to make sure that we are not moving from deniers to fatalists, and we have to look for these moments of hope. If you sort of look at your generation and you talk to people of your whatever within your courses or whatever, do you feel that that your position is a more general way the younger generation looks at, or are you a little bit more the exception? Because we often hear about climate anxiety or anxiety in general about the future. How do you sense that around, within people around yourself?
Yeah, well, I think I'm a pretty positive person, so I might be perhaps on the other end of the spectrum when we think about our younger generation having hope for our future. But I do think that the general, maybe looking at the ASU community, I think even though people might not care about what's going on in our environment, people still know that Earth Day is April 22nd of every year, right? And people still think that they're doing something good when they recycle or they bring a cup to a coffee shop. And I think just how society has changed from before to now is something that I think is how really society has grown to accept some of these sustainability actions. And I have the opportunity to travel to Vienna this summer through the College of Global Futures, and I'm going to learn about all the great things they're doing in Europe. But one of my friends recently came back and said, what they're doing in France with their reusable cup program, the whole entire French community has almost adopted that way of life. And they've accepted that, okay, well, when I reuse a cup, I'll return it back. And I think realizing that societies can change at such a large level makes me hopeful that, okay, hopefully America can do this too. Even in Arizona, I know politically it might be a little hard to pass some climate legislation, but maybe conversations I have with people that aren't in the sustainability field, I can almost encourage them to have some stake in the climate crisis, to think, oh, well, I really like the outdoors, I love traveling, how can I do my part? And so trying to be encouraging others to communicate with their friends, and maybe encourage all of you guys to talk to someone that isn't in the field of sustainability and really tell them, like, hey, do you like your backyard? Do you like what's going on? Do you see something that needs to change? And almost encourage them to do their part. Because I think it's going to take more of like that grassroots collective activism type solution in order to solve climate change as we see it.
Yeah. Following on to that, Karen, how do you see the major motivation playing out? Of course, you can have legal action or regulations, but you also can have that sense of actually a movement saying we have to change, which is coming from sort of your inner understanding of what does the world look like, who am I in that, and what is my role? How does the legal framework and regulation play in that versus self-motivation, let's say? And how does that change between, or how is that different between cultures? I mean, Europe, we often say, is ahead of the US, and how do you see that landscape? To which extent can legal frameworks move things, and to which extent do we really need that inner motivation?
Yeah, that's a great question, a heavy one, but a great one, right? Those are the kinds of things we need to think about. And I loved Katie's answer because we can translate young people and optimism and bringing a cup into changing the world through legal action. Like if I can get the person who understands they need to bring a cup into my classroom, we can do something with that, and we can transform that individual action into an understanding of how to wield the tools of law and government, which are the backbone of contemporary Western society, in ways that culminate in large-scale social action. Because really what law and government does is it takes a bunch of individuals and coalesces their individual interests and priorities into something that speaks socially. And so law is at once everywhere and also hidden. It's not something that's fun to read about. It's not something, well, I like it, but it's not something that's sort of like easy, fun to understand, but what it does is it can coordinate groups of people in ways that can really create change. And so what I do with the Radically Reimagining initiative here at ASU, it's Radically Reimagining the Human Relationship with Nature. And it came from having young students in my class receiving tons of depressing messages about, we're stuck with the laws from the 1970s. We can't change them. We know you came to this environmental law class to care about pandas and learn how to save them, but really we're just going to talk about how much pollution companies can put in our airways. And after about 5 years of teaching that, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I think this is depressing. I think it's a limited perspective. I think we can do more and better for people who show up in good faith wanting to change the world and are told, no, this is the way we do it here. These are the legal tools that we have to work with. And so the fun thing that's emerged through the initiative and more broadly, particularly in conversation with global partners, is understanding that you can take that enthusiasm and instead of killing it, say, learn the tools, learn all the ways that you're able to manipulate and change law and government and society through legal innovation, and then apply it to the things you care about and the relationships that you have. And that kind of legal innovation is doing amazing work, but it requires looking outside, just like go to Congress and ask for a new statute, and instead engaging in much more organic ways.
Great. Lisa, we have a lot of disinformation, fake news, and public distrust, and it's rising actually. So how do we protect fact-based messaging and maintain public engagement? And just throw social media into that.
Yeah. I mean, we're storytellers. We're wanting to tell stories. In fact, I want to tell the story that I'm going to Vienna next Tuesday. And we'll be working there this summer and next year at YASA. You know your friend there. So in doing that, I've just conveyed to you some information about me, and so where does disinformation and misinformation fit the point? Well, people can start to add to it. They can change, the truth or the facts by putting in other stories that don't necessarily align with the facts. But there's some really interesting new work. In fact, our conference that we're having over the next few days will have some strong elements of that. And the UNESCO and UN is now funding some sort of large funds for journalists, not just for academics, but for journalists to begin reporting and investigating misinformation around climate change, and looking at all the various cross-border networks that might be involved, why, and understand. So it's often these bigger institutions will be funding academic researchers, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. But really, I'm seeing it for the first time that journalists who do this job really well and can track down these sources and work together in a comprehensive network and start to track this, can get the information to the public much clearer. There's more ability to look at this, but also I think at this moment in time, the global disorder that could happen from so much disinformation is become real. And I see that will be sort of at the forefront of the maybe next year's conversation. Journalists are having to go out and correct information quickly and repeatedly. It still doesn't seem to be enough because we always, as humans, are drawn to these really outlandish and often surprising ideas, and sometimes those are the ones that are not true. So to go back and correct that is, again, sort of a repeated, a little bit boring job. So absolutely a time where we can work with young people on seeing new ways that we can get new, good, factual, evidence-based information that is, accurate, can be verified, and as well teach and share good sources of information and how to do that with our communities. And that goes in both directions, to the people sort of at one end of the age spectrum to the other end. We all can sort of fall into that trap. So looking at ways that we can have the best sources of information, verify the information, and if you see it in one news outlet, check another source to see what another news outlet is reporting to verify what you learn. So I think there's that literacy element that's a part of it as well. Because there are bad actors out there that are trying to confuse us. There's a lot of evidence behind that as well. And they're wanting to eliminate action on things, as well as kind of have us be talking about maybe not this issue, when we really should be investigating some sort of deeper issue. It's sort of it's making sure that we have enough information to the public in the ways that they also want to be receiving it as well. I heard about the storytelling here, that the power of narrative has that. Videos can share that. Sounds and conversations, the stories that we share. Having those rich discussions can help to counter some of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Just following on that, we academics increasingly are not trusted. And especially in the US, there is that trend. In Europe, it's starting too. I think in Asia, it's still not as pronounced. So if I look at, from my perspective, at the domain of journalism, there seems to be a slightly different landscape where people, pick who they want to, quote unquote, trust based on their belief system and their value system. How do you navigate that?
Oh, there is true. Like, we are looking at the same silos of information. If your political views align with you, you believe that person. I think there's a lot to be said that journalists and scientists have a lot in common. Yeah. We both seek truth. We both want to verify it. We both look to be as accurate as possible. And we want to be socially relevant and for society and scientifically relevant. I think that, so one of the things that I'm doing in Vienna, or just outside of Vienna in Europe, is to get closer alignment with scientists there to understand more about that work, developing partnerships to understand what the research is before it's out. So I think there's a value for a journalist to be closer to scientists, to understand their flow, so that it can maybe help to be translated and demystified. I think there's a greater, especially with young people, there's a much greater ability, opportunity, interest in younger scientists to convey their work directly to the public, or even in a sort of broader networks to policymakers or people who span those boundaries at NGOs. So to that respect, I think maybe that we've got this next wave where we can sort of jump that boundary, that barrier that's been put into place now. In terms of breaking those boundaries, again, I think it's very much repeated and continued engagement with people who can demystify what science does. The same thing with journalism. And we have to sort of peel back the curtains a bit to share kind of what we do, how we work, so that people can see there's a lot to the reporting that we do versus just the 8 inches of text that is on your news feed.
And hopefully SHA will be a major force in moving
It
that.
is. I mean, as this is our 35th year, so kind of mirroring the Earth Day sort of trajectory.
Michael, in your view, what have we failed to fully grasp or act on since Earth Day was created?
You know, I think really the thing where we probably failed is not realizing that we're in this time of big breakthroughs, of really, there's a sense of this, the fear, the dystopian sensibility, but when in point of fact, the breakthroughs are coming and they're coming very, very fast. You know, the president's son-in-law before the election was given $500 million from the head of the Saudi Sovereign Fund, directed by MBS in Saudi Arabia. And it was a mandate on that $500 million to put 250 million of it in solar exclusively. If you listen to his father-in-law, you would be none the wiser. One of the architects, the co-author, the lead author of the chapter in Project 2025, which is the boogeyman under the bed for lots of folks, she goes by the moniker online, Mississippi Mandy, Mandy Gunasawara. She put that out there. People are afraid of that. Look what's happening with all of that stuff. Well, her day job is at a private equity shop that she co-runs with her husband. What are their two leading investments? Renewable energy and financial technology, fintech. Who's her husband? He happens to be the general counsel of Ginkgo Solar, one of the largest solar companies on earth. So some of this dystopian stuff, I think, is maybe a byproduct of the focus and emphasis on social media and that distraction. So one of the failures is just not recognizing these big breakthroughs that are happening. So we need to focus our attention on what is meaningful and what has momentum. And I think that's really those solutions that are out there.
Just looking at the time, let's move towards closure by a question for each of you. And it is, what should Earth Day look like 10, 20, 50 years? So you can pick your time horizon in the future to remain really inspiring, effective, and enthusiastic, as all of you seem to be about it. Let's start with Lisa and go over to Michael.
Well, in 10 years, I want us to get to those must-haves and must-dos that we've been working on. Looking at what must we have to have a sustainable future, and achieving that means we must have a livable planet, and we must have solid communities that work together. We must have trust in information and trust in each other, and as well, having it be economically viable. These are not exactly, but they're close, yeah. Right? And so, but these, as a journalist covering these, why I do so is because it's not just about trees and water and heat or whatever. It's about all the facets of our society, and I think of it as sort of this multifaceted gem that there's so many different aspects to cover as a journalist, to report out and to learn and understand, as I'm sure you feel in the classes and the coursework that you take and you teach. So for me, in 10 years, I want this gem to continue to be relevant in all of these facets for the people to continue to hold on to and work together and cross those boundaries and starting to invest and create this livable future. I'm looking at the 10-year timeline because I think that's a really critical one to keep our eye on.
Decisive decade. Which timeline would you choose, Katie?
I would probably also say 10 years, okay. But from the sense that younger people are starting to have really short attention spans. And so I think because our youth population is really heavily embedded in social media and technology and scrolling through TikTok and Instagram and seeing bits of information within 30 to 60 seconds, right? I think looking at the 10-year timeline is going to be really going to encourage us to gain momentum. And I feel like every Earth Day, I'm always like, oh, Earth Day is every day. And so sometimes it's harder for me to get into that, movement, but really trying to encourage the younger generation to see Earth Day as a spark that starts a movement, a spark for them to realize, okay, my future is on the line, and what can I do about it? And we have all the solutions available for us. And like Michael was saying, like the solutions are out there. We just need to put them into practice. And that's why I'm ultimately going into public policy and the environmental policy route, because we have the solutions available. We just need to put them into practice. And so I think looking at Earth Day, I would like it to start a movement, but we need to take our thoughts and put them into action, because I think the younger generation is really all about going, and how do we get the ball rolling. And I think if we use Earth Day as a way to gain momentum to take those actions, then that's all we can ask for, really.
Great. Karen, what's your horizon?
Great. I'm going to stick with 10 years. I
All
like
right.
the thought process here. So solidarity. I am a futurist. That means I like to co-create new futures. So I am going to envision, I'm going to manifest a future in 10 years when we gather outside and it's not so hot in Phoenix in April that we cannot be outside.
Right.
I'm going to manifest a future in which Katie or someone else in this room is leading this conversation because they've created a position for themselves that resonates with their enthusiasm for the environment and for the planet. I am going to manifest a future where we get here by walking, by biking, where we're eating foods that are more aligned with values of production, so that we're not doing sort of the academic removal game that we all play, where we have our real lives and then we have our academic lives or our lives at school, and where it feels like a more integrated whole. And I'm going to say that perhaps we come here with companion animals, because I'm a big proponent of interspecies equity. So I would not be sad if the ASU campus, like my own yard in Phoenix, has been rewilded so that we have bobcat and javelina and hawk sitting among us on this outdoor platform where we're co-creating new futures and reality with a new generation of leaders that are on fire and passionate to embrace the forms of hope and optimism and solutions building, but mostly the relational aspects with one another. In a sense, it's more community embeddedness and outward facing rather than the more narrow academic mindset. So that's a future I'm trying to create. That's a rough draft made on the spot, so hopefully people can co-create better versions like V2.0, V3.0, and everyone can sort of think about what their version of that Earth Day may look like.
Sounds like a great vision. I'm just missing the mountain lions. Michael, your time frame.
Yeah, I'll say 10 years.
All right.
55 years ago, Earth Day was what, an SOS, yeah? I'll say in a decade, it's going to be about 3 S's, and it ought to be about 3 S's. Showcasing sustainability solutions. If we do the math, and we see that solar is doubling every 3 years, in a decade, it's going to be an order of magnitude more, and very likely more than that. That is really the sweet spot for big breakthroughs of solutions. And I think that's what we're going to see in a decade from now. And even if you don't believe it, the trajectory is already there. So let's wait for that decade to come.
So one final question again for all of you. If you could leave today's audience with one challenge or call to action, what would it be? And let's go the other way around. Michael.
You know, I would give you 2.
Right.
Just because,
just because.
2 easy ones. Let's dial out of social media. Let's dial out of that addiction space. That's really what that is. And the other one, let's lean into that original Earth Day mandate. Really, it was a call to live true to demos, to polis, to civicus, those sort of fundamental terms of engaging as a citizen. Let's lean into that. Not just for being a good citizen, but to really help accelerate those solutions. I would put that charge to folks.
Mm-hmm. Karen?
Mine is go outside. Go outside today, go outside every day, go outside every time you have an option, just go outside.
Just make sure that in June, July, and August you are back before 11 o'clock.
Go outside safely. Well done. That was very lawyerly. Nicely done.
Yeah, no, I mean, I go outside every day, but I do make sure that I'm sort of do it early.
That's a good addendum. I like the disclaimer. Go inside at your own risk. But go outside. I think the more time we spend in nature, the better everything gets. Individually, our communities, our planet, the more time we are outside, the more connected we are to the natural world. And I think everything flows from that relationship.
And we might actually recognize that we are part of nature rather than stewarding it. Katie?
Well, you took mine. But
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I do think going outside is super important. But I guess the second one is to just have those conversations with people that you agree, you disagree with, have conversations with people, across the aisle. I think having those conversations, telling your story and sharing why you care about the environment, what really motivates you is what's really going to spark this momentum.
Lisa?
These are all great. To add to them, I would say, and it's easy to do here if you're a student, and maybe fairly easy if you are faculty here, but continue to build your community. A sense of community is critical to solving any of these problems. And whether it's a community that maybe you have multiple spheres of community, you've got your colleagues, you have your neighborhood community, or an affinity group that you're belonging to, but building a sense of community. And some of that does mean putting that phone down. I don't have anything against the phones, but committing to some digital minimalism so that you don't have that barrier between you and that other person. They're good to activate people, but I think spending more time with people in real life is critical to our future. And I know that there's literature about this, but I think that it's even more pressing than we realize to not only shore up our spirits, but also exchanging ideas. That's where innovations and dialogues can come. That's where you can create a good relationship between a journalist and a scientist. You actually come up with a new idea that didn't happen before that exchange of knowledge happened. So that I would just encourage you to start having conversations with each other. Talk to people randomly on the street, if it's not weird. How are you doing? You never know where it's going to go. And I think just showing that piece of care, it's also about caring for us, for our planet, for our communities. It will come to bear in probably the best possible way if done right.
Yeah, and you can start in the taxi or Lyft or Uber, and you are surprised what kind of conversation you can get into. Lots of good advice. We could go on for hours here without any problem, but sadly, we have reached the end of our time slot here. I really would like to thank all of you for wonderful conversation, and I hope we can continue that in one form or the other at some point. So thank you, Michael, Karen, Katie, and Lisa, for all your thoughts and for, as I said, a wonderful exchange. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you, everybody.